Good morning. I'm pleased to be here with Premier Kenney and Minister Taves for an important announcement regarding our government's support of Alberta's technology and innovation sector. I would like to thank Improbable for hosting us here today. They're a great example of a company that is employing Albertans located right here in the heart of Edmonton. The tech and innovation ecosystem is vital to Alberta's economy, both now and in the future. That's why our government formed the Innovation Capital Working Group, consisting of representatives from key areas of Alberta's tech, business, academic, and financial communities. The group was established to provide government with advice on how to incentivize capital investment in the province's tech and innovation ecosystems. They consulted heavily with the technology and innovation, venture capital, and business experts in our province and developed their report based on those consultations. We received the group's report, and now we're acting on several of the group's recommendations to help jumpstart the economy and build additional strength in the tech sector. I want to thank each of the members of the group for their hard work and extensive consultation. Our two co-chairs, the President of the Business Council of Alberta, Adam Legg, and the Dean of the University of Alberta School of Business, Joseph Doucette, as well as Susan Anderson, Derek Hunter, Corey Jansen, Christina Milkey, and David Vanka. Their expertise and dedication provided us with key insights that are going to be critical to the development of our technology and innovation strategy this fall and the measures that we announced as part of Alberta's economic recovery plan. Now, more than ever, we want to ensure Alberta businesses, our job creators, have the support they need to not only recover from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, but to become stronger than ever. Our announcement today is a key element of our government's recovery plan to create jobs and diversify our economy. Through this plan, we are building on our economic strengths to attract investment and position our province for prosperity. And we know that a key to prosperity is fostering growth and development in technology and innovation. We know that technology and innovation are not only sectors in and of themselves, but rather enable all sectors to grow. Energy, agriculture, aerospace, healthcare, and video gaming, as we see here today, are part of this ecosystem. Now, I would like to welcome Premier Kenney so that he can provide more information on how we are making Alberta the destination of choice for technology investors.
Thanks very much, Tanya, and thanks to our hosts here at Improbable for welcoming us in downtown Edmonton. Great to see the work that they're doing to create a product, hopefully, that will be sold all around the world as a real example of innovation in this province. We all know that this has been an amazingly tough year for Alberta's economy, the largest global economic contraction in a century. On top of it, the largest collapse in energy prices in history, and all of that on top of 5 years of economic adversity. And that's why, since day one of the COVID crisis, Alberta's government has been focused on protecting both lives and livelihoods. That's why 3 weeks ago we launched Alberta's Recovery Plan, a bold and ambitious plan to build, to diversify, and to create jobs. Part of this involves, of course, the largest ever capital build program in the province's history, creating an estimated 50,000 jobs through an unprecedented $10 billion investment to build the architecture of tomorrow's economy, from roads and highways to infrastructure projects and schools and hospitals, irrigation projects, pipelines, and so much more. It's also why we accelerated on July the 1st the job creation tax cut, making Alberta the most attractive place in Canada and one of the very top in North America in which to start a new business to create jobs. It's also why we are ensuring a future for our province's largest industry, an industry which is increasingly driven by innovation and technology, our energy sector, doing so in part by creating thousands of good jobs for folks in the service sector through the billion-dollar site rehabilitation program and the historic investment to begin construction on Keystone XL, also creating thousands of jobs. That job creation tax cut, by the way, is estimated by several economists to create some 55,000 new full-time private sector jobs. But it's also why we identified a number of important sector strategies to accelerate the diversification of Alberta's economy. We have a good story on diversification that we don't celebrate enough. Alberta's economy is, we've seen the oil and gas sector is a smaller segment of our economy today than it was 40 years ago, while other sectors like services and technology have continued to grow year after year. But we can and should be doing so much more because technology isn't just a sector. In fact, it is the future of all sectors. And that's why we will be releasing in the weeks to come a ambitious technology and innovation sector strategy. But we're here today to launch a critical part of it. And that is the Innovation Employment Grant to help support tech companies as they invest in critical innovations that create jobs today while supporting a more diversified Alberta economy in the future. This program will help small and medium-sized businesses that make up the bulk of the startup sector. Alberta's government will do this by offering a grant of up to 20% for businesses that are investing in research and development. This supports those firms and companies that are investing in Alberta, that are creating jobs here, and are helping create a more diversified economy. This Innovation Employment Grant will also bring in new job-creating investment as new firms and businesses look to take advantage of all that this province has to offer. Companies that come to create jobs in Alberta through tech and innovation will be able to benefit from this grant, from support through the Alberta Enterprise Corporation, and from the lowest tax rate on job creators of the 10 provinces and lower than 44 of the U.S. states. This means that there is support for these job creators at every stage of their development, including their startup phase when they aren't actually reporting profits, but they're in that critical phase that says so many startups don't make it through. That's why they need this kind of support, and that's the advice that we've taken from the Innovation Capital Working Group. So we'll be there to support them from the early days of development when liquid capital is hard to come by, and when they're able to produce, market, and sell their final product, turning success into more jobs and opportunity for people. The Alberta Enterprise Corporation will support Alberta's tech and innovation sector by giving them greater access to critical venture capital, industry connections, and operational expertise. To help support this and to ensure the support is available as quickly as possible, Alberta's government is providing an additional $175 million over 3 years to Alberta Enterprise Corporation, which we estimate will create up to 4,000 new jobs. This additional funding will have an immediate impact as eligible companies will be able to invest in Alberta and create new jobs in our province when they're needed most. Finally, another important element of the tech and innovation strategy will be ensuring that we have people with the right skills for the tech sector. We're doing so in part through our Skills for Jobs initiative, which is encouraging and incentivizing experiential learning, including in the innovation sector, for example, by expanding support for apprenticeship programs, including in high schools, including for tech jobs like, for example, coding. It's also will be supported through the Alberta Advantage immigration strategy, in particular through the startup visa, which we'll be launching in the weeks to come, to ensure that to address what many tech businesses report as a shortage of people with relevant skills for the innovation sector. So altogether, this is a robust plan. We are going to have the strongest incentives in Canada for tech and innovation, leading to the lowest business tax rates once these companies become profitable, supporting access to venture capital through Alberta Enterprise Corporation, and supporting the future skill and labor market needs of this critical industry through the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program and the Skills for Jobs strategy. So very excited about what this represents for the future. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Finance Minister Toews.
Well, thank you, Premier, and thank you, Minister Furr. And again, a thank you to the folks here at Improbable for hosting us. It's really a pleasure to be here. And, You know, and in the face of really what's a great economic challenge for the province, it's so good to see a world-class tech company thriving right here in our capital city. And we know that Improbable is not alone, that there are other tech companies in this space that are thriving. So it's my pleasure to be here to provide more detail about Alberta's new Innovation Employment Grant, or the IEG. As part of Alberta's recovery plan, the IEG will encourage investment and support innovative small and medium-sized firms in our province. Beginning on January 1st, 2021, the IEG will provide companies with grants worth up to 20% of eligible research and development expenditures. Labor costs will be the main driver of the benefit a firm receives, so this grant will support employment by incentivizing companies to hire Albertans. The IEG will also include an incremental approach that will be unique within Canada. It will reward companies that increase their spending on research and development activities. The grant will deliver an 8% benefit on the firm's base level of R&D spending, providing stable and predictable support for innovation. But the incremental approach comes into play when companies increase their R&D spending. The IEG will offer a 20% benefit on spending that is above the firm's average R&D spending for the previous 2 years. This 20% payment will be significantly more generous than similar tax credits offered in other provinces, including British Columbia and Ontario. For example, a company investing $250,000 in research and development in Alberta would receive $50,000 of support through the IEG. The same company would receive $28,000 of support in Ontario, while in BC it would only receive $25,000, half of the amount of direct support. If the same company increases its R&D spending to $500,000 in the following year, in Alberta it would receive $85,000 of support. This company would receive $56,000 in Ontario and $50,000 in British Columbia. You can see how quickly these significant differences will add up for a developing company in the innovative and tech sector. Alberta's IEG will focus on small and medium-sized firms by beginning to phase out support when a business reaches $10 million in taxable capital. It will fully phase out when the business reaches $50 million in taxable capital. The Innovation Employment Grant is designed to dovetail with Alberta's low corporate tax environment provided by the Job Creation Tax Cut. Companies that are in the pre-income and scale-up phases will initially benefit from the IEG, but as they become more profitable and are phased out of the program, they will benefit from Alberta's preferential business tax rate. These two initiatives will work together to support the growth of businesses of all sizes and in every phase. By targeting smaller firms and offering a generous incentive for increased R&D investment, we're continuing to establish Alberta as the best place for startups and high-growth firms. And once these businesses are succeeding, they will reap the benefits of the reward by far of the most competitive corporate tax rate in Canada. We know investment decisions require planning, so we're providing details now to give firms time to begin planning to take advantage of the IEG next year. We know this economic recovery will take time, and there are challenging days ahead. But rest assured, we will continue to do all we can to create an environment where businesses can grow and thrive in the province, because we know that is the key to sustainable job creation. Thank you.
Okay, before we get the Q&A started, in addition to the Premier, Minister Taves, and Minister Furr, we have Adam Legg, President of the Business Council of Alberta, available for questions. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
The first question comes from Carrie Tate of the Globe and Mail. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I'm curious, Premier, we saw Calgary pass a mask mandate yesterday. I'm wondering what you think of that, and as you keep encouraging people to wear masks but not mandate it, why the split there?
Well, we've said we'll respect a decision of municipalities in that regard. We think these decisions are better taken locally. This is a huge and diverse province. The challenges that a very dense city might face on crowded buses is couldn't be more different than a remote rural municipality where there are no active cases. So we think a one-size-fits-all approach for a huge, vast, diverse province like this doesn't make sense. Secondly, I want to remind you that I've been advocating for widespread use of masks where people cannot physically distance since long before the Public Health Agency of Canada, the World Health Organization, were doing so. And we think that the best approach on a provincial level is public education and making masks available to people. We're the only jurisdiction, certainly in Canada, if not the world, to have made tens of millions of masks freely available to the population. That's partly just been to kind of normalize the concept of mask wearing. We know that in Asian countries, which have had I'll take you back to my televised address to Albertans in mid-March. I said, I think we really need to follow the successful strategy of Asian countries like Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong, one common element of which is widespread mask use. That's been normal for a very long time in those cultures, dealing with pandemics in the past. It's not something we're familiar with here. I would remind Albertans who are skeptical or frustrated with this that it's not completely new. Back in 1918, 1919, you can go back and read articles. We were having these debates back then, but people accepted the need to keep others safe. And I would finally just point out, like as I say, the cities, if they decide to go in that direction, that's their decision. They're accountable to their voters. They're dealing with a much denser population than we do in other parts of the province. Finally, I would just point out to those who are skeptical about this that, wearing a mask is not a sign of fear or trepidation or any of those things, or subjugation to some big government mandate. Wearing a mask is just a simple sign of consideration for others with whom you might be close, particularly in indoors. It doesn't prevent you from the wearer of the mask from being infected, but it can significantly, according to overwhelming scientific data, it can help to reduce the chances of the mask wearer from unwittingly spreading the virus to someone else. So it's just a mark of consideration, and I believe that's very much in the part of the Alberta spirit.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Rick Bell of the Calgary Sun. Your line is open.
Good morning, Premier. Following that, I understand that you're respecting the wishes of the Calgary City Council. I have a two-part question, if you get your pen out. Number one, on the masks. One is, we are also being told, and we're very confused down here, because we're also being told that we're in a second wave of COVID infection in the city of Calgary. So I'd like you to talk about whether not only do they have the right to make their own bylaws, but they also have the right to have an alternative set of facts. And number two, one of the bad actors down here, even admitted by members of City Council, one of the COVID-19 bad actors is certain high-volume bars in entertainment strips in the city, and of course they aren't affected by the mask bylaw. City Council is doing nothing on this. So in other words, we're in a situation where you are forced to wear a mask in a grocery store in the early morning when there are 4 customers, but you can be in a bar at midnight in a packed bar 6 inches away from somebody yelling, and nothing's going to be done. There's going to be no enforcement of that. So if you could deal with the bar issue and also with, do you believe that we are in fact in a second wave?
Okay, so on the second question about whether we're in a wave, obviously, Rick, there's been an increase in the number of active cases in Alberta, and it is concerning. I spoke to this yesterday, and I said I think maybe some people are just tired of all of this. I get it. Or they think maybe they're young and therefore immune, or maybe they think this whole thing is exaggerated. But whatever the reason is, I think some people, a minority of people, are less careful about the public health guidelines than they were a month, 3-4 months ago. And so I would just send a message to those folks. You might be young and healthy, and if that's the case, you're probably not going to be affected directly by COVID, but you might unwittingly infect somebody else, somebody vulnerable, somebody elderly, perhaps a grandparent, and that could become life-threatening. So please have that consideration for others. And if you think you can get like into big, crowded indoor social functions, and you're right, like 6 inches away from people, shouting at them in a loud bar, that is a real problem. Now, what we have done as a province is to trust people responsibly to exercise their freedom, to show personal responsibility. We don't want to get to a situation where there are, again, a series of policies that damage our economy, that put people out of work, because that has a lot of negative, ultimately, health consequences too. So we would just say to folks, whether if they're operating a bar or restaurant, or visiting a bar or restaurant, please observe the common sense guidelines and don't put yourself in a situation where you might end up being part of the spread. In terms of the mask use, again, I'm going to give that back to the city. It's the city's decision. They're responsible. They're accountable to their voters. You've raised some very good questions there. In terms of whether there's a wave or not, while there has been an increase in new cases, that is concerning, it's also worth pointing out that the total number of active cases of hospitalizations and COVID patients in ICU are a fraction of what our models projected at the peak. We, in relative terms, are well below where most European countries, U.S. states have been, and we're below where the larger Canadian provinces were. So I said from the beginning, Rick, and I want to remind you of this, that this disease, this virus, is here to stay for at least a few more months until there's either widespread treatment or an effective vaccine or sufficient immunity in the population. But it will come and go, and we should be alert to that. We should be responsible and careful, but we shouldn't get ourselves into a situation where people begin to panic every time there's an increase in new cases. We've got to be cool-headed about this and responsible in our actions.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Kevin Nimick of CTV. Your line is open.
Hi, Premier. Yesterday, the Alberta Medical Association announced they'll be holding a vote of confidence on the Minister of Health. If they vote against Mr. Shandro, will you switch him out of the portfolio, or are you taking into account the opinions of doctors in this province?
Of course I won't. I have full confidence in Minister Shandro. He's elected by Albertans, by his constituents, not by any interest group. And we're not going to allow interest groups to subordinate democracy in Alberta. And let me say this, we value and honor our physicians. They are obviously a critical part of our healthcare system, which is why we are giving them the highest level of physician compensation in Alberta history and the highest level in Canada. We honor our physicians so much, we believe they should not only be fairly compensated, but indeed generously compensated. In fact, Alberta spends 10% of our province's $55 billion budget goes to compensation for 10,800 doctors. So we have a population of 4.4 million, of whom 10,800 are physicians, and they're receiving $5.4 billion in compensation, which is 10% of the total government budget. It is nearly a quarter of the total compensation for people in the public sector. Actually, no, yeah, that's correct. So our point is simply this, that we cannot continue to see average annual increases of over 6% in physician compensation in the middle of a fiscal and economic crisis where private sector families have seen their incomes decline by about 10%, and most people in the public sector have seen wage zeros in their incomes for the past several years. So we want to work with the physicians, which is what we have done through our physician funding framework. And we are in negotiations, for example, with the ophthalmologists about an agreement with them. They've approached us on that. And as I say, we respect our physicians, but I would also ask that the Medical Association also respect taxpayers. They respect the economic reality of this province. They respect the fact that our economy has shrunk by 20% in the past 5 years, while their compensation has gone up by over 20%. That simply is not sustainable. And so, and Mr. Shandro, I think, is doing a fantastic job of trying to convey that with regard for the professionalism of our physicians, but also regard for the fiscal limits of taxpayers during a fiscal and economic disaster.
Okay, we have time for 3 more. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next question comes from Terry Reese of CBC. Your line is open.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much, Mr. Kenney, for taking my call today. Just wanted to check in on the reopening of schools. You did mention that our rates are going up. So what would the plan be for schools should COVID infections continue to spike upward over the next few months?
Well, there are details in the plan that we released yesterday about potential outbreaks in a school or wider spread growth in infections. Fortunately, we've been able to pilot this approach this summer. Calgary Catholic Division has been operating summer schools. They had an incident where I think one of the students was apparently symptomatic, and so the school acted with great alacrity, sending kids home, isolating staff as well, immediately access to testing. Lots of information was shared immediately. Thankfully, that student tested negative, and they were able to come back and restart the class. So that was a good dry run of how this would happen if and when there will be infections. There's no doubt there will be amongst 750,000 students and tens of thousands of staff. And so, if there's a local outbreak of significant spike in new active cases in a particular community, the principal, superintendent, and school board will consult with Alberta Health Services and the Chief Medical Officer on Health on what the appropriate response is. I want to underscore that many jurisdictions around the world who have had the best track record in fighting COVID-19 have kept their schools operating at full capacity, by the way, with higher classroom density than we have here in Alberta. I talked earlier about the best performers in the world in combating COVID. Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong are amongst them. All 4 of those very dense countries maintained the full operation of their K-12 schools throughout the pandemic, and I'm not aware of any significant problems. In fact, all of those countries have had extremely low levels of infections. It's all, as I mentioned yesterday, it's equally true that a number of European jurisdictions, like Denmark and the Netherlands, amongst others, reopened schools after the peak of the pandemic and have not experienced outbreaks or health problems as a result. So we have lots of encouraging data from around the world that has informed our decision to reopen, together with the views of 86% of Alberta parents who say that they want the schools open. I'd like to just close this by reminding folks what Dr. Hinshaw said yesterday. We can't eliminate the risk of people contracting this virus, and that includes prospectively students and school staff. We have to manage the risk, and that's exactly what we're doing in a prudent and careful way. We also have to be mindful of the risk of shutting things down indefinitely. In this case, the risk to the mental health and the life prospects of children if they go through potentially a year or 2 without getting back into the classrooms. So there is, I think, a growing consensus amongst pediatricians and amongst child welfare experts that there are huge negative consequences for the mental health and the life prospects of children if they're locked out of the schools indefinitely. So we think we're taking the responsible approach to manage risk, learning from the example of other successful jurisdictions.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Shannon Scott of CBC. Your line is open.
Oh, hi. I'm hoping that Adam Legg might be able to comment for us on the Calgary mask bylaw and what he's hearing from his members about the new rule.
So the question was around the mask bylaw in Calgary? Yeah. Yep. Our members have been long put in place a lot of these safety protocols and procedures in their offices and in their plants, and have operated very successfully. To our knowledge, none of our members have had a case of COVID-19 amongst their workforce. You know, there are measures that the City of Calgary took yesterday to put in place mandatory masks. We do acknowledge that was probably the right move in light of what we're seeing in Calgary. As the Premier said, it is individual jurisdictional choice, but we do applaud the City of Calgary for taking that measure, given what we're seeing here in the larger centre.
Okay, we have time for one more. Operator, can you please put through the last caller?
Final question for today comes from Audrey Nouveau of Radio Canada. Your line is open.
Hi, my question is for Premier Kenney. If you could answer in English and in French, I'm sure it will be helpful for my colleagues too. We've just heard that the Alberta RCMP is laying 4 charges of terrorism against an Alberta man from Calgary for his activities with the Islamic State. So it's a man from Calgary who was in Syria in 2013-2014. How do you react to knowing that these charges were laid 7 years after the fact? And do you think that Alberta is well protected against such terrorism-linked people?
I'm happy to hear that charges have finally been laid on this case. It's important that law enforcement send a message that there is no immunity for Canadians who go abroad to commit acts of terrorism, to victimize the innocent, and in some cases to also attack Canadian military personnel. Very, very important that we underscore that there are the strongest possible legal sanctions for that kind of gross, violent behavior targeting the innocent. I am not familiar with, look, I was the Minister of National Defense who deployed the Canadian Armed Forces to fight ISIS in Syria and oversaw their deployment in Iraq as well. And so this matters a lot to me. It was outrageous to see Canadians leaving the peace and security of this country that's given them so much freedom and opportunity to go abroad effectively to fight Canadian troops who were standing up for international security, peace and democracy. So I'm glad there's finally been at least one charge. I hope there are other ongoing investigations, because we do know that there were dozens of Canadian so-called foreign fighters who went abroad to join ISIS and similar deeply hateful terrorist organizations. I'm sorry it took 7 years to see these charges laid, but I'm not familiar with the details of the case, and I'll offer the same in French. Je suis heureux qu'enfin on a vu les charges criminelles les accusations criminelles contre un membre de Daesh, de l'État islamique provenant du Canada, parce que c'est un crime grave et épouvantable à quitter la sécurité, la paix du Canada pour aller outre-mer, pour combattre, dans certains cas, les forces armées canadiennes et pour commettre les actes terroristes contre les innocents. C'est dégueulasse, et je suis heureux qu'enfin on a vu une charge, parce que je sais, comme un ancien ministre de Défense nationale, qu'il y a eu les dizaines des Canadiens qui ont quitté notre pays pour participer dans ces groupes terroristes comme l'État islamique. Je suis désolé que ça a pris 7 ans, mais enfin, je ne suis pas au courant des détails du cas. J'espère qu'il y a les enquêtes criminelles contre les autres soi-disant combattants qui ont voyagé outre-mer pour s'attaquer les Canadiens et les innocents.
That concludes the Q&A. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.